Right guys, after our dive into the King in Yellow, I've wanted to do something like this for quite some time. It's strange because we as fans of literature, cinema and culture, although perhaps we aren't always conscious of it, are constantly borrowing tropes and conventions, small little fragments of a theme or an idea, and then adding them onto our own pile of our own interpretation of things. Our world of forms, just like how the famed authors of cosmic horror, Ambrose, Chambers, Lovecraft and their ilk would pass down the true titles or misnomers of their own terrifying great old ones, so too do we, intrinsically, instinctively borrowing from the rich tapestry laid out before us. But at what point do these things lose their identity? At what point do they become something new? Well, let's board the Ship of Theseus and see what remains. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scary channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch. Today, in our next entry in our Lore Explored series, we break apart the components of the legendary Ship of Theseus. Roll the clip.
So you brandish your axe.
That's the axe that slayed me.
Is he right?
For the curious amongst you, of course, that clip was from 2012's John Dies at the End, adapted and directed for the silver screen by Don Cascarelli, but based upon the incredible 2007 novel of the same name by David Wong. And for the astute amongst you, you'll understand that John Dies at the End, both the novel and the film open with a very similar and familiar paradox: the grandfather's axe. As it states, solving the following riddle will reveal the awful truth of the universe, assuming you do not go utterly mad in the attempt. Say you have an axe, just a cheap one from Home Depot, and one bitter winter day you use said axe to behead a man. Don't worry, the man's already dead and he's a Nazi zombie, so it's okay. On the last swing the handle splinters, you now have a broken axe. Now say if you replace the handle of that axe and then a year later you used it again to chop some strange eldritch creature that had crawled into your kitchen into pieces, but in the process, unfortunately, you chipped the head of the axe and again you had to replace it at the hardware store. But as soon as you get home with your newly repaired axe, the same Nazi zombie from before shambles in front of your front door. When you brandish your axe high in the air, he wheezes, "That's the axe that slayed me." Is he right? Now, interestingly enough, for those of you that have read David Wong's phenomenal novel, then you'll also understand that he had written in some form of paradoxical failsafe to this mind-bending equation. And although I won't spoil it, because really, read John Dies at the End, it forms the overarching theme of that same paradoxical and thought-provoking novel. But also, as you will learn throughout the confines of this lore explored, David Wong was simply highlighting one of the oldest thought experiments in human history, the Ship of Theseus. And for those of you still scratching your heads wondering what the hell this whole Nazi zombie axe beheading opening gambit is all about, let's set the scene a little bit more. In the metaphysics of identity, the Ship of Theseus is a thought experiment that raises the question of whether an object that has had all of its components replaced fundamentally remains to be the same object. It is one of, if not perhaps the oldest philosophical concepts in Western philosophy, and it is one that still manages to shake off the cobwebs of human thought to this day. It was first posited by Plutarch in his 1st century biography, Life of Theseus, discussing the life and works of the mythical Greek king of antiquity and founder of the Kingdom of Athens, although the same concept had been long discussed by Plato and Heraclitus as early as 400 BC, although we'll get to that later. Now, the titular ship in question was a famous vessel said to have been sailed by the hero Theseus himself during a great battle of the ages and had been kept in the harbour of Athens as a museum piece. As the years went by, the wooden parts began to rot and be replaced by new ones, and scholarly minds such as Plato and Heraclitus, well, it got them thinking. The thought experiment later laid out by Plutarch, though, goes a little something like this. A ship goes out in a storm and is damaged. Upon returning to the shore, the ship is repaired, with the parts of it being replaced in the process. Again and again, the same ship goes out to sea, and again it is repaired, until one day, eventually, every single component on the ship, every single plank of wood and nail has been replaced. Is the repaired ship still the same ship that first went out into that first storm? And yet, if it isn't, at what point did it become a different ship? Say you collected every single part of that ship that was discarded during the repairs and used them all to rebuild another ship. If you place the two ships side by side, which one of them would be the true Ship of Theseus? Or instead, would it be both of them? Or would it be neither? You see, much like David Wong's axe, and with the same concept of the grandfather's axe laid down before that, what these paradoxical notions bring into question are the fragilities of identity over time. But hold that thought for a moment, because if you're pondering as to how this metaphysical notion of identity can only ever be applicable to inanimate objects like ships and axes, just take a look at yourself for a moment. In many ways, at many levels, biologically, consciously, physically, in some senses, we are the Ship of Theseus. Within the span of 7 years, every single cell of our bodies will die and be replaced without us ever realizing it. Intrinsically, over that period, continuously, we are literally not the same person that we once were. And if that is the case, then it poses a far more pressing explanation for the human mind to require. If the very essence of we as human beings is replaced just as easy as the planks of a ship or the handles of an axe, then where lies our identity? What part of our psyche remains behind? What makes us? Now, please don't expect any form of an answer for this video, because even the musings of some of the greatest philosophical minds in human history have struggled to wrestle with the Ship of Theseus, but still, it is a pattern that has emerged time and time again across the ages, throughout history, in culture and art, video games, entertainment. It is the core component of the passage of storytelling behind all of the fragments of thoughts and ideas passed on from person to person, from artist to artist, and monster to monster. Take, for example, Frankenstein's monster, penned by Mary Shelley, and perhaps the most clear and present example of the Ship of Theseus in horror literature. Although Shelley's novel is told through 3 separate first-person accounts, the second of them, The Tale of Frankenstein himself, lays out what it means for the human mind to ponder on what we're made from. As that portion of the novel explains, Frankenstein lived a happy childhood with his young mother after she marries the older and reputable Alphonse Frankenstein, a man who has already seen the change of seasons of his own life. Frankenstein is afforded a brilliant education, giving him the chance to try and decipher all of the secrets of heaven and earth. He studies both natural philosophy and alchemy, and as a scientific mind does, he seeks to unravel the core components of what makes a human, what makes a man, and in doing so, as we know, and as Shelley pens, he perverses the sanctity of creation, and by compiling the components of the dead in the pursuit of engineering the human form instead of the beautiful image that Frankenstein expected, he is disgusted and reviled by his own creation. What is most interesting about this example in horror literature, though, are the actions that the creature later takes. Although compiled of nothing but spare parts, the monster teaches himself to read, and with literature he begins to display a human consciousness, facing the existential question of who or what he is. Now, as compared to the Ship of Theseus in that regard, it would suggest that no matter the physical form the psyche takes, it is merely a vessel, a ship. But here what Frankenstein errs upon is the notion that there is no ship. In conceptualism, the ship does not exist, but is merely a label for a particular organization of matter and energy in relation to time and space. In that sense, Frankenstein's monster had exactly the same right to exist as Frankenstein himself did. He is arranged of the same parts, just in a different order. They are both the same ship, side by side. But again, if that sounds familiar, take a more popular example, one that employs a much more technological aspect of the monster and the ship. In 1983's Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker and the Force ghost of Obi-Wan ponder on what shreds of humanity Darth Vader has left behind, and whether it was possible that the man, Anakin Skywalker, could still be redeemed. In making his point, Obi-Wan states that Vader is more machine than man. All of his parts have been replaced, his biological presence stripped away and restructured by something entirely different. Now, is he the same? Or what about the remarkable Altered Carbon series, both the brilliant 2002 cyberpunk novel by Richard K. Morgan, as well as the awesome 2018 Netflix adaptation of the same name? Hey, you could even argue that the novelization to television is a Ship of Theseus in itself, but whatever. Instead of direct physical replacements, though, what Altered Carbon tackles is the notion of replacing the body entirely, slipping in and out of skin suits like one would try on a new coat. What Richard Morgan delivers in his novel is the idea of stacks, a physical representation that stores human consciousness, and sleeves, interchangeable bodies that have become the societal norm in the far future. In Altered Carbon, it tackles the idea of the incredibly wealthy being able to live multiple lifespans, essentially conquering immortality by fabricating fabricating their own biological bodies over and over again. In that sense, if the Ship of Theseus was put through a metaphorical manufacturing plant, would the process still hold up against the notion of the self? Where do we draw the line in the thingness of a thing, especially when we apply it to something as sacred as the human body? The phenomenal Ghost in the Shell tackles a similar theme, and yet instead argues the paradox of a human being as alive even when synthetic. Or to bring things back down to earth, take for example the remarkable 2013 novel S, written by Doug Dorst and conceived by J.J. Abrams, which is one of the most mind-bending and entertaining pieces of literature that you could ever hope to tackle. In terms of meta-fiction, considering we're talking about meta-philosophy, S is a book inside a book inside a book, a theme similar to House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, although this one takes it to a whole new level. S is presented in the form of a novel called Ship of Theseus, written by an elusive author named V.M. Straka and published back in 1949, and yet inside that publication are the annotations of two collaborative readers who have both read this book before we have, the reader, and have both tried and failed to decipher its many mysteries. Whilst being an incredible novel that you should certainly read, it also manages to literally tackle the same thought experiment of the Ship of Theseus, and yet it goes one further. If we were to annotate it and leave it for someone else to read and then annotate, would it be the same book that we read? Now, there have been similar themes tackled throughout history, particularly with Vladimir Nabokov's 1962 novel Pale Fire, but it harkens back to so many other literary mysteries and curiosities that it's certainly evident of how much sway the Ship of Theseus holds over our own unconscious thought. Take Shakespeare, for example, and the eternal historical mystery as to who actually was responsible for his body of work. Was it a single person, William Shakespeare, or was it a group of people all adding different parts of the same components? If it was revealed, would it even matter? Would the Ship of Theseus that Shakespeare had created remain the same? You see, in terms of science fiction and horror, recent shows such as Black Mirror and Westworld have strived to tackle these exact same themes. In this age of mass production and technological abundance, deciphering what an identity means is an ever-present urge for our society. It is one that has found its way once again to the forefront of our culture, and it is one that remains to be answered in its entirety. It is the same question, just made up of different parts. Well, there we have it, guys, and I for one thoroughly enjoyed that particular lore explored. But what do you guys think? Do you have your own Ship of Theseus tale to tell? Then let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. First up, Barlow says, side note, cool Sonic Youth t-shirt. Thanks, Barlow. It's actually my second version of this same t-shirt, actually. Whoa. Ship of Theseus. Keep Madu says, Jack could talk about anything and make it intriguing. Not entirely sure about that one, Keep. I mean, have you heard me talk about the regal importance of pickling in ancient China? Yeah, exactly. Although, pickling is amazing. Pickles rock. And finally, Veen Studio says, time is a flat circle. You'll do it all again. Not you again, Reggie Ledoux. It's the 5th time this week, mate. Clear off. Well, on that note, unfortunately that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe button, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.